Okay, so we're gonna look at a game that was played between Anish, Giri, and Wang. It was in the second half of the candidates tournament, and this game was a crucial win for Giri. That put him close to the leader, who was Nepomniachtchi. Although in the end, Nepomniachtchi won the candidates tournament. So Giri decided to play the Catalan, which is one of his one of the common openings that he plays to gain a slight advantage in the opening. And this is one of the main lines. He plays queen c2 to recapture the c-pawn. And Wang Hao just continued to develop. Okay, so white played knight c3 here. He lets black take on f4 because he doesn't mind having the double pawns here, like this, because now he has the chance to use the g file in the future, and he also has a stronger hold on e5, so he kind of has a stronger center. Black plays a5, and his idea with a5 is to take advantage of the b4 square by playing knight a6, because white does not have a c pawn and already pushed the a pawn, so there's no pawns that can actually kick out, that can actually control the square. So knight a6, knight e5. So white decides to trade the bishops, because he feels that black's bishop is quite good here, controlling these two squares. c6, and now Anish plays h3. So this is the first new move of the game. It's a novelty, and the idea is to create a space for the king, just in case in the future the black queen ever comes on this diagonal and checks. Black plays queen b6, white drops back with queen e2, and Wang Hao plays c5. So I think c5 is an inaccuracy because it weakens the b5 square, but his idea with c5 is to undermine white's strong center and kind of fight back for space. In hindsight, I think knight b4 is better, or safer at least, followed by knight b to d5, and there wouldn't be any clear weaknesses for black yet, although he does have a more passive position. So c5, white has a couple of options here. He plays rook fd1. So d takes c5, it is also an option, but it's probably not the best because it just helps black to develop his knight. And now the knight controls these two squares, so I wouldn't say that's the best. But queen b5 is logical. The problem with queen b5 is that black can make a lot of exchanges. So he can trade the queens, white takes back with the pawn, and then he can take on d4 instead of moving the knight. If he moved the knight, he would just be losing. Yeah, this would just be losing. So he has this intermediate move, and then a lot of pieces gets traded down until white's a pawn up, but black will get a lot of activity. So after rook b2, black pressures the f2 pawn. The c pawn is also weak after rook c2. And there's also the possibility of rook c8, followed by f6. So this c pawn is very weak. It's probably gonna get recaptured. Okay, so anyways, white played rook fd1 because he didn't want to trade just yet. He wanted to play for more winning chances here because he has a slight edge here. And black trades and plays rook d8, which is a mistake. The best option for black is actually something like knight c5, and if queen b5, queen c7. And white can double up, and this is very unpleasant, but with precise play, I think black can hold it with something like rook c8. It's very passive, I agree, so very unpleasant to play. But so this was already like all caused from the c5. There was actually a lot of weaknesses that he created, especially this b5 square. So anyways, here white has a couple of options too. He decided to take. Queen b5 was an option, but it does trade a lot of pieces. So I guess black had to take here, because if queen c7, then rook c4, attacking the queen, and then white would pick up the a5 pawn. So trade the queen, and then trade the rooks is also kind of forced, or is the best. And white does win a pawn, but black trades off everything but the knights. Knight c4, and white is up a pawn and playing for a win, but there's still a long way to go to winning. So he decided to just keep his advantage with rook takes d8. Rook d1 is also good, because rook d8 is not possible. If black tries to trade all the rooks, his a5 pawn will fall, and this time in more favorable conditions for white, because he won't have to swap queens. He can take with the knight, and his queen will be very active still. Okay, so white decided to trade the rooks instead and follow up with rook d1. And black decided to move his queen to this diagonal. So if he moved the queen back to b6, queen b5 would be very good for white. This endgame would be very good because white doesn't have to trade the rooks, and he can just hold on to this open file. And these pawns are very weak as well. You can follow either knight d7 at a good moment, or knight c4, or knight a4, knight c5. There's a lot of plans for white here. Okay, so that's why black decided to play queen a8. White just drops the king back. Knight b4. So Wang Hao's idea is just to maneuver in the knight and try to block as much play with white's rook as possible with knight d5. Okay, queen b5, putting the queen in a very active position. Also pressuring a5. Knight b d5. Knight takes, rook c1. But now Giri switches to the other open file with the rook instead. Knight c4 would also be good, winning the pawn, but this would allow for some counterplay. So Giri decides to go for the initiative instead of material. Rook c1, h6, queen e7. So It doesn't look like there's a forced win anytime soon, but if we flip over to black's position, it's very hard to make moves here. It's very unpleasant to play, and very easy to make a mistake in that case. Basically, his rook is tied down here. His knight has to control some key squares on c7, and the queen has to kind of defend these queenside pawns, so not a good position for black. Knight f6 is what Wang played. I think knight b6 is a better option, because after queen d6 he can try and trade the queens, and try to trade as many queenside pawns as he can. Check, knight d3, rook c1. So this is just a sample line. Obviously white doesn't have to play queen d6, there's other options too, but after dropping back to knight f6 and queen d6, it's hard to find any counterplay for black. The problem with queen d8 now is that white can just take and play rook c7 and then win a pawn without any counterplay. So yeah, and here black couldn't really find a move and decided to play g6, but this is bad because now it creates a weakness of the knight on f6 and b3. Black's special option for counterplay was queen e8, b3, and b5, but after g6 white protects a4 and just continues to improve his position, and now he plays queen d4, and now we see the weakness behind the knight after g6. The g pawn no longer protects the knight and it becomes a weakness, a target. Rook d8 is kind of forced, queen b2, queen b8, b4. So this was Giri's idea with dropping his queen back. Although his queen was very strong here, the queen on b2 is also very good because it pressures the knight on f6, and there's a possibility of creating a battery on b7 with the queen and rook. Okay, so take is forced, and now rook c4, b3. Amazingly, there was a chance for a draw with rook d1, but Wang missed it because he was in time trouble, and it was also very hard to find. So rook takes b4, queen d8, rook takes queen d5. Basically, black is sacrificing everything but his queen and rook for the forced draw. And first is this rook sacrifice, and then h4 is also very hard to see in advance. King g4, and then here's the perpetual. Okay, Wang played b3, and then after that, it was pretty much impossible to defend. Note how rook b8, white can just play knight c6 even, or sorry, knight d7 is just winning. Yeah. And after the rook gets to b7, f7 becomes a weakness as well. And here Wang resigned and Anish won a very pretty clean game in the, I think, 9th round of the candidates tournament.